so I'm going to start. News that this is, I believe, halfway through the course. This class, we're now halfway through the course, so let's hope that I make it through the rest of the course. I'm sure you will. You'll do fine, but me, I don't know about it. I'm not doing so hot on the quizzes. Let's just put it that way. So, where did I end? I ended with psychology, yes? And as I said, I put the definition of culture up here just in case someone needed to see it, because I did write it on the board, but if you were not able to copy it down, then it's here on the PowerPoint. I just did it because I was reminded to. Thank you, Mr. Pei, for reminding me of that. So I'll have to put this new PowerPoint onto Blackboard with the new slide for culture. And what else I was going to say about that? I guess that's all I wanted to say. I just left it up there. If you need me to put it up later, then let me know. I can put it back. So I'm going to move on to psychology. Oops. I'm past psychology. Why did I put William James there? That's weird. Okay, psychology. Psychology. What is psychology? Well, there's my definition of it. The study of the behavior of the human mind, primarily the human. Of course, they have animal psychology and stuff like that where they study animals' minds, but we are also animals. But specifically psychology, I mean the study of the human mind, especially for the purpose of treating mental illness, to treat how the mind goes awry, how it goes off the rails and can become sick and diseased. And psychologists learn how to identify that and how to hopefully cure it. I've been in therapy for many, many years, and it hasn't worked so far. But here's hoping. But they also have drugs. So, you know, there is the drug element. So that's not too bad. Legal drugs, by the way. Not. The word psychology comes from the Greek word, and it's not here on the PowerPoint, so I'll put it on the board. And move this out of the way for the moment. There we go. Psyche, this Greek word. Yes, you have to put a line over the E because it's a different letter in the Greek alphabet. Psyche, which means soul or spirit. Now, did you say you have difficulty reading my writing? Does anyone have difficulty reading my handwriting? Can you tell, or it's okay? Soul or spirit. I think that's what you said. If you did not, then I apologize. But soul or spirit, psyche, psychology. So we already know this. We know psyche. We know what that means now. We know ology comes from the Greek logion, which means words about something. So the study of the soul, the study of the spirit. So it's like, hello, miss. Okay. So psychology is studying how the mind or the brain perceives reality, but also how the mind or the brain can distort reality. For psychologists, religion, as with everything, comes from this source. In other words, that comes from the brain, comes from the mind. everything for psychology, everything comes from the brain or from the mind. That's the focus of study. So religion is no different. And so psychologists might study the question of, are there structures in the brain which can give us those transcendent experiences, that numinous experience, or that experience of ultimate reality, a feeling that there's an ultimate reality? Since everything goes back, remember, psychology no less than the other things we studied, anthropology, sociology, the materialists. Everything is physical, everything is matter. So it's the brain, nothing else. So if I'm feeling that there is an ultimate reality, have an experience of transcendence, well, that's just coming from up here in my brain. So can we look at the brain and see if there are structures in the brain that are giving those experiences? The father of modern psychology is this man, Wilhelm Wundt, and I'm covering up his picture. Let me get out of the way here. This picture of this guy, Wilhelm Wundt. Yes, remember the fad a few years ago, and it still seems to be kind of around because I still see it with guys every now and then, to grow these super long, dense beards, almost to look like one of the seven dwarfs from the movie. I still see it, yeah, so I can't say it's gone away fully. I mean, I love beards too. Hey, I'm a beard guy, I love it, but not 7 inches long. Anyways, so just to go show you that fads do not, fads are in style, fads are out of style. So there you go. There's a guy with a big, huge, long beard, Wilhelm Wundt, who is considered the father of modern psychology. Why? Why is Wilhelm Wundt? Well, because he established a laboratory in 1879 at the University of Leipzig. Germany, at that time was the German Empire. Leipzig, Wundt established a psychological laboratory, so he's considered the father of modern psychology. However, there were American scholars who actually pioneered the psychological study of religion. Okay? Wundt was just generally interested in matters of the mind, but there were Americans who were interested in how the mind and religion come together. So, for example, a man named G.S. Hall, I don't know, I'd have to look it up, I don't know what G.S. stands for his name, but G.S. Hall, he founded the first school of religious psychology at Clark University in Massachusetts. So he's just write his name down here for you. His initials are G.S., I don't know what they stand for, but if someone could go on the internet and find it, make sure it's G.S. Hall, I'd appreciate that. Clark University, Massachusetts, established founded a group or a school is the word I used, to study religious psychology. And also he established the American Journal of Religious Psychology and Education, which was the first kind of journal in its field, the first journal to specifically, I guess when they say in its field, to bring together the specific study of how religion and education go together, those two areas and how they interact. A big name for psychology and religion is this man, William James. Again, I'll try and move myself out of the way. There we go. This man, William James, you can see his dates there, 1842 to 1910. There's a picture of him. He was trained as a medical doctor, but he never practiced, but he'd have a degree in medicine. And he taught physiology and psychology at Harvard University. And I looked it up because I wanted to know how, I guess physiology is the study of how the body works, its systems. But, because my question was, how is physiology different from anatomy? And maybe if someone here is doing the biological sciences, you could explain that to me. Because to me, anatomy and physiology seem to be pretty much the same kind of thing. You're dealing with the various systems of the body, the muscle system, digestive system, nervous system, all those different things, all their parts. But physiology is a little bit different. I'd have to look it up again to see why. Maybe I'll do that during the break. But anyway, so he taught physiology and psychology at Harvard, and he had a rather positive, unlike some of these people like Durkheim or Freud that we'll get into, or Karl Marx, people like that, who had a kind of a negative view of religion, did not necessarily see it as a benefit. He thought it was a positive thing. He thought religion helped people live a positive and a courageous life. How did it do that? It helped them to accept their life condition, where they were in life, okay, their situation. And he wrote a famous book on religion called The Varieties of Religious Experience, which you can see there. Principles of Psychology. So he was a psychologist, and he wrote a textbook on it. I don't think it's used anymore, obviously. It's out of date by a long period of time. You could probably find it on the Internet Archive. It's in the public domain. And then the famous one here, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which even though written in 1902 is still still considered a classic, and people might read it, especially if you're doing a degree in religious studies. Somewhere along the line, you might have to read the book, the whole book, or read portions of his book. I have never read it, but I've just read about it. So just for full disclosure. Anyways, in that book, The Varieties of Religious Experience, he does exactly what the title suggests. He looks at religious experiences that people have. And he describes them, and he tries to analyze them. What are they, and how do they help people? What do they, and how do they connect up with psychology, with his psychological studies? And so James offered this famous distinction, which I'll tell you about, between the religion of healthy-mindedness or healthy-minded people and the religion of the sick soul. And this was a distinction he made to kind of describe an optimistic religion, a religion that gave an optimistic view of the world, like the problems were solvable in the world. Any problems that you might encounter, a person encounters them religiously with optimism that I can solve them, I can pray to God, and God will give me answers, etc., and so forth. So it's a positive outlook, the religion of healthy-mindedness. But then there was a more pessimistic one, which he called the religion of the sick soul. So here we see that religion can be a positive force and a negative force. It can be a reservoir, a source of optimism, nonviolence, but it can also be pessimistic, and also which could lead to violence. If a person is feeling bad all the time, the person can seek to lash out, to release that bad feeling in some active way. In other words, violence. But it's interesting that he does not see religious as a purely negative thing, something that's just prone to pessimism and violence. There is a positive outlook. So it is a classic text. We're going to move on to someone who has a not so positive view of religion, which would be someone I've already mentioned, which is this gentleman, Sigmund Freud. So anyone able to find G.S. Hall? Oh, I hear you now, miss. What? What does G.S. stand for? Grantville Stanley? Let me write that down. Will Stanley. G.S. Hall. What does it say about him? Is it from Wikipedia or another website? NSBI? I don't know what NSBI is. Huh. Yeah, I'll have to look that up at the break. I'm curious. Curious to see what Wikipedia has to say. So Grantville Stanley. What? Grantville Stanley? But isn't that a great name, though? Ah, okay. Philistine, +1.
He was the first president of the American Psychology.
Really? The American Psychological Association?
Mm-hmm.
Huh, that's interesting. Learn something new every day. Granville Stanley Hall. So let me write that down for everybody. And I'll give you an extra credit point, Ms. Philistine, that I will add to your final grade. You're welcome. I'm sorry that I did not see your hand before. Grantville Stanley, otherwise known as G.S. Hall.
There's no T.
There is no T? It's Granville? My mistake. Who said that? Oh, Ms. Marquetta. Thank you. So I guess now I owe you a point too. Okay, Granville Stanley Hall. Okie dokie. Freud. You can see his dates when he lived, 1856 till 1939. He was born in Moravia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic. Moravia. Modern-day Czech Republic. But I think they're also calling themselves Czechia. I see that on Google now. I don't know what countries' names. Countries have names and then they decide they want to be called something else. Anyways, but it's the Czech. It was the Czech Republic since the 90s when they got their independence from the Soviet Union. And now I see on Google it says Czechia, so I guess they want to be called Czechia. I'm going to still say the Czech Republic, and since, as far as I know, there are no Czechs and then Czech people from the Czech Republic here who are going to get angry with me, then we should be fine. But if anyone has an objection, then I will go back. I will say Czechia. Anyways, that's where he was born. But also, I think this area was part of the German Empire because, his career was mainly in Austria, the modern-day country of Austria. But he was of German descent. Freud was of German descent. Oh yeah, it was the Austro-Hungarian Empire. I have it here in my notes. Which was another empire which was in Europe at the time. As I said, remember, Europe was a patchwork of all different kingdoms and principalities and empires. And one of them was the Austro-Hungarian one, which combined the modern-day countries of Austria and the other country of Hungary, which is next to it. And so they had a big portion of Eastern Europe and parts of Western Europe in their empire. And so he was Austrian. He's considered Austrian from Austria. At least that's where he practiced. But where he was born is Moravia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic, as I said. He came from a Jewish background. His parents were Jews, but they were ambiguous about their Judaism. They were somewhat observant, but not necessarily completely religious. For example, the family would celebrate some Christian holidays like Christmas. And Freud did not really like the Catholic atmosphere of the city of Vienna, which is in Austria. The city of Vienna that he lived in and practiced in and grew up in, I guess. I wonder if he grew up there. Well, anyways. But he didn't like that atmosphere. It was a very Catholic, overtly religious city. I guess there are a lot of images of saints and Jesus if you walk around the city, which, if anyone's traveled to Europe, is not uncommon in certain parts of Europe where you'll be walking down a street or driving down a road and you'll see a crucifix on the side of the road, a place for people to stop and pray, or a picture of Mary, the mother of Jesus, painted on the side of a wall. Painted a lot of places. Like if you go to Italy, they're all over the place. Images of the saints or the Virgin Mary and stuff like that. He did not apparently like that very much, which you can understand. Being a Jew, he's kind of an outsider. So maybe he wasn't treated so well, or maybe he didn't feel he was treated so well. He was a doctor, he was a physician, and he was, at first he was interested in brain research, which I guess today we would call a neurologist or a neurosurgeon. So, okay, so remember this is the 1800s, so it's very beginning stages of modern surgery and modern medicine. But he was interested in brain research, but later he became interested in mental illness. And I wonder if this is on the next slide. If not, I'll go back. Well, I might have to go back anyways. And he founded his own school of mental illness, which is not really unusual, I guess, because considering how in the early stages of modern psychology it was, there were really no schools of psychology at the time, unless you're talking about Aristotle, who came over 1,000 years, or 2,300 some years before, or 2,200 years before Sigmund Freud, or if you're going to take philosophical texts from the Middle Ages, this was a whole new beginning. This was the modern period. So to say that he founded his own school of psychology, well, he kind of had to, because there wasn't anything there. He called his form, or his school of psychology, the psychodynamic school, psychodynamism. Again, see, we have the word psyche there, so spirit or soul. And we also have the word dunamis, which means power or force. Dunamis in Greek, which means power, force. Okay, so basically the force of the soul, or the force of the spirit, or we could say the force of the mind, the power of the mind. And what is this school? It's a psychological approach which holds that human behavior is based on unconscious and conscious motives. Okay, there are motivations, there are drives, is a very famous word that Freud used to describe these things. There are drives that push the mind to do things and to develop the way it does. Drives such as the sexual drive, the drive to reproduce, the biological drive, the drive to feed yourself, okay, give yourself food so you survive. Death, fear of death was a later one. He added that on later. The human being's fear of, what comes after death, and the fact that death will inevitably come for all of us. So the drive to run away from that, to deal with it. So there are unconscious, and usually these motivations are unconscious. They are bubbling underneath the surface of the mind, but also could be buried deep in the mind, to where you're doing things and feeling certain things about yourself and about your situation based on past experiences that you don't even remember, but they are there. They're embedded. And so the purpose of psychodynamism or psychodynamic therapy is to, and it takes a long time. It's not a quickie therapy. It's usually multiple sessions across a week, where a person usually does free association, just talks about the contents of the person's mind. The therapist is there basically listening, saying, okay, well, what's coming into your mind? And the person spends the next hour saying, okay, mother, I'm thinking about my mother and how she used to do this to me, and now I'm thinking about being out on a boat on the sea, and how scared I was because it was stormy weather, and just the person just talks about anything, and the therapist who's trained is looking for indications that point to connections that might be the source of mental illness. And this takes a long time. This takes years. It's not quick therapy. But what the purpose of that process is to find the underlying motivations of the person You can only really do that by letting at least from Freud's theory, you can only really do that by letting the person talk a lot. Okay. Anyways, Freud, as many of these people were at this period of time, was interested in religion. And not surprising, religion was, in the 1800s, was a very, very much a part of people's lives, of society. And so we can see in his writings this influence. Well, very clearly in his writings, this influence. An early article he wrote was called Obsessive Acts and Religious Practices. And then we have 3 books here, Totem and Taboo, where he basically explains where he thinks religion came from. The Future of an Illusion, where he explains how we can make religion go away. We can solve religion through psychodynamic therapy and make it go away. And then Moses and Monotheism, where he talks about Judaism, being a Jew. That obviously, Judaism was, even if he wasn't practicing, apparently, Judaism was still a concern. And so he wrote about where did Judaism come from? So obviously, if you're looking at unconscious motivations here, the dude can't help but keep writing about religion. You might have, if I were a Freudian, I'd be asking, like, why? Why? Because he was an atheist. He was totally unconcerned about religion, and yet he couldn't stop writing about it. I think he couldn't stop writing about it and talking about it because there's another thing. I did not have you read this. I was thinking of making it a required reading of a talk he gave about religion to a scientific group, and I read through it. And what does he say? Religion is, he saw religion as like the big competitor with science. Okay, he saw religion, which he viewed as irrational, as the competitor for rational science, because religion answered those great questions of where we came from, where we're going, what is the world made of, what is it, what is its purpose. But Freud saw it as that's now science's job, and science is doing a better job at answering those questions, but religion still won't go away. So maybe that's why he was, why he wrote about it so much. Anyways, let's see. Do I want to go into that? Does that have any kind of purpose? No, so I can skip over this part. In his, I'm just going to go over this article and these books a little bit to give you an idea of how he viewed religion and what it might have to do with violence, because it actually, especially in Totem and Taboo, the book Totem and Taboo, we can see a clear connection between religion and violence. But just to give you some background, he was early on fascinated by religion, and especially how religious practices seem to be comparable to kind of like obsessive compulsive practices of mentally ill people. So in his article, Obsessive Acts and Religious Practices, he noted parallels between, the meticulousness and the repetitiveness of religious rituals. The fact that they had to be done over and over and over again, that they had to be done over and over again in a certain way, or if it were done wrong, you might tick off the God, make the God angry, make God not like you. So he noted that with the same kind of qualities practiced by obsessive personalities, that the person had to wash his hands 50 times, but it couldn't just be 50 times exactly. It had to be washed in a certain way, a certain manner, a certain fashion. And if you screwed any part of that procedure up, you had to start over. I don't know if anyone ever saw the show Scrubs on television. Ever hear of the show Scrubs? Some people yes, some people no. Okay, so I'm just going to use an example from that. There's an episode with, the actor Michael J. Fox. You've heard of Michael J. Fox? Yes, Back to the Future movies, and he was in other movies as well. He was in that episode, and he played a doctor who was an excellent doctor, like the perfect doctor. The problem was that he was only perfect because he was mentally ill. He was obsessive compulsive. So he couldn't just have the textbook and do the readings from the textbook that he was assigned in medical school. He had to read the whole textbook over and over and over again. Hence, he knew a lot of stuff, you know. But there's this whole scene where late at night after his shift is over, there he is in the scrub room from surgery, still washing his hands. He can't leave yet because he keeps making mistakes while he's washing them. So Freud looked at that and said, look at how religious people, say a woman praying the rosary, the little beads that you might see, rosary beads that people pray. And all religions have this, little prayer beads, over and over and over and over and over again. And then over and over and over and over and over again. You keep doing it over and over. And, look at the priest at Mass, not so much these days. Don't get me started. But, in the old days, the form of the Lord's Supper, or if you went to a Catholic church, the form of worship was very regimented, very formalized, very controlled. And if, like, the priest did something wrong, he'd have to go and do it over again and stuff like that. Maybe not that obsessively, but there could be instances where if the priest said the wrong words, he might be like, whoops, and have to go back and do them over again to make sure the whole thing was valid, that it was acceptable to God. It was in this article, Obsessive Acts and Religious Practices, that Freud first identified religion as a universal obsessional neurosis. A neurosis. In this article, Obsessive Acts and Religious Practices, where Freud early on comes to the idea that religion is a form of mental illness. It is a neurosis. Sorry, I did not look up the Greek word that is the background to this word, so I don't know what it literally means, but I know it has something to do with the nervous system because, you have neurons and stuff like that connect the nerves together, or connectors in the nerves, so something to do with that. But anyways, neurosis. Now, there's neurosis and there's psychosis. At least he didn't say it was a psychosis, which is more serious, because there are neuroses and then there are psychoses. That's the plural. Psychosis, and the plural is neuroses, and psychoses. What's the difference? The way I kind of describe it and try to keep it in my mind, keep it correct in my mind, is a neurosis is a mental illness, whereas a psychosis is a mental disease. So a neurosis is kind of like having, the flu. If you have a mental illness and the counselor or the psychologist says, I think you're neurotic or you have a neurosis, then that means you have like the flu. If you have a psychosis, that's kind of like having cancer. That's more of a disease, okay? And it's a lot harder to treat. And it's usually in the cases of psychosis, although they do it with neuroses as well. But it's usually in the case where you have psychosis, like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, where a person is up and down and up and down. They're happy, they're depressed, they're happy, they're depressed, they're happy to, or they're bouncing between those two ideas, those two emotions. I shouldn't say bipolar because I know there are different terminologies, and I might not be using it exactly correctly there. Hold on, I'm thinking in my own mind if I can remember what I learned about it. Well, anyways, but you get the idea. A psychosis, that's usually where drugs and medications will come into play, because for a person who's a schizophrenic, who's psychotic, as they might say, there's really nothing more really you can do. You can't counsel a person who is psychotic a lot of times because it's a disease. If a person is schizophrenic and thinks that he's a werewolf, there's not much you can, or is so disconnected from reality, is a paranoid schizophrenic and thinks that, the color of the tie that I'm wearing is a form of violence, like it's a message to him that I want to, like he reads into my tie the message that I want to kill you after class, and so the person goes crazy and bananas in the classroom, and that's a psychosis, and really the only thing to level that down is taking medications. So that's the difference. Freud did not say religion was a psychosis. It wasn't that, but it was a neurosis. It was a form of mental illness. And with treatment, he thought, especially psychodynamic treatment, you could cure it. Should I go into the Oedipus complex? Maybe I should just go into it quickly to kind of understand. Well, I won't go into it into too much detail. This Oedipus complex. The Oedipus complex. Actually, overlook the Oedipus complex. I'll just summarize the idea, and I won't get into what Oedipus complex is because it will take me too long to explain the whole myth. The word Oedipus is based on a myth, a Greek myth, a story about this man named Oedipus. And to make a long story short, basically, there's a prophecy when he's born that he will eventually kill his father, the king, and take over the kingdom. Well, the father doesn't want that to happen, so he exiles the son, the baby, and just kicks the kid out of the kingdom. Well, one thing leads to another. The kid comes back one day when he's grown up. No one recognizes him, of course, because baby, he was a baby, he was a child when he was kicked out. And what eventually happens is that the prophecy actually comes true. He ends up killing his father, the king, and becoming king. But there's a problem because no one recognizes him, because they don't know. His mother and father don't know that it's him because they got rid of him when he was unrecognizable to them, and now he's all grown up. His mother falls in love with him, the queen, and they get married. And the son and his mother do what people. Well, I shouldn't say people do, because whatever. But they do what people sometimes do on married nights. And the mother then, of course, in the story, in the mythology, after they do the deed, they commit incest. Then somehow they find out, they discover that, wait, someone comes running in. Uh-oh. She's your mother! Well, Oedipus goes crazy. He rips out his eyes and blinds himself. The mother kills herself because of the shame. And so it's this famous myth of Oedipus. Oedipus, king of Thebes, I believe is the kingdom. Oedipus Rex. Given as Oedipus Rex. Oedipus the king is given its Latin title, even though it was a Greek myth. But I don't know if they've done any operas about this. But anyways, so even way back when, people had raunchy stories that they used to tell around the fires. What does that have to do with Freud? Well, Freud had this idea, his own idea, that at a very early age in the development of any baby, but especially any male baby, I should say, that the male baby is already a sexual being, already has a sexual inclination towards sex. Remember, there are drives. One of the drives is the sexual drive, the drive to reproduce. It's already there in the mind. And so a male baby is already sexually attracted to his mother. And that explains, for Freud, that explains all the clinginess and the fact that, male babies want mommy to hold them and kiss them and do all this stuff. They're sexually attracted to their mothers. You can probably already see the connection with the Oedipus myth and why he calls it the Oedipus complex. Problem is the father's in the way. Assuming that the mother's married, but in this case, he's assuming that. There's a father, and the father stands in the way. Why? Because the mother will only give her sexual favors to the father. Okay, and the male baby doesn't understand this. So what happens is the male baby, and I'm saying baby deliberately because, it's at an extremely young age that this happens for Freud. I wrote it down, between the ages of 1 to 5 when this happens. Well, maybe I shouldn't say baby, maybe I should say toddler. Because 1-year-old that's not really a baby, right? That's more of a toddler, would we say? Or could you still say a 1-year-old is a baby? Okay, so from baby to toddler to pre-adolescent, I guess. But it develops very quickly and very early. And so the male baby recognizes that the father is now a force to be reckoned with. He stands in the way, and so the male baby hates the father. Hates the father. However, he also fears the father. Why? Because he hates the father because the father has sexual access to his mother that the male baby wants. But he's afraid of the father because the father is bigger than he is, can harm him, and also, and excuse my French, the father has a bigger penis than he does. Hence, if you've ever heard the term penis envy, have you ever heard that term? Penis envy, that's where it's coming from. The male baby envies the size of the father's penis, that he's more powerful than he is in his Is anyone a psychology major? Have you touched upon this yet? You did? Am I making it up? Moving on. Okay, so now we're over kind of like the dirty bit. So what happens is, the thing is that the child has to resolve this somehow, because it's not going to change. The father's there. The mother is not going to do what the child wants and just put the father out of the picture and give herself solely to the child. So there has to be a resolution. If the child accepts the power position of the father, and accepts that that he does not have that position, then there is a healthy integration of that relationship, and the child moves on into a healthy, fully integrated sexual being, adult. Okay, fine. If the boy does not, then you have a neurosis develop. Okay, you have the child can't handle it, and so, for example, you might, the child, even as an adult, you think about a person called a mama's boy who always is around mom, even though he's 49. I'm just looking. It's Freud might look at that and say, yes, you did not resolve. It was complex. You did not resolve it. Okay. Now what does this have to do with religion? Well, we'll see in Totem and Taboo. Because for Freud, the whole source of humanity's violence and of humanity's problem is the Oedipus complex. Everything comes down to this Oedipus complex. It's the whole foundation for his psychological model. Now, there are some psychologists, not Freud, but a person who was a disciple of Freud called Carl Jung, who saw the same kind of dynamic, no pun intended, going on between daughters, girls, and the fathers, where you have a girl baby who wants to have sex with the father, but the mother stands in the way, and so you have mother hate instead of father hate for the boy. He called that, and there is a Greek myth on that. The Greeks apparently were big on incest in their mythology, called the Electra complex, of this woman Electra who has sex with her father. But Freud rejected that idea. He said, no, it just applies to the male child. It does not apply to the female child. But you have to remember that Freud was very full of himself, and you had to agree with him always or no ways. It was his way or the highway. In fact, if I remember correctly, I think Jung either left the group or got kicked out of the group because he disagreed about something with Freud. That's just the kind of guy Freud was. And so, anyway, but there is a female version of this called the Electra complex. The problem with the Oedipus complex, no one follows the Oedipus complex anymore. I mean, Freud was so proud of it and thought it explained everything. And as you said, those of you who are doing psychology, you'll learn about it like it's a relic. Here's this theory that someone once had, but, unless you are, and there still are Freud, believe me, there still are psychodynamic counselors out there. There are Freudian counselors out there who, one of my first psychiatrists was a Freudian. He was the one who helped to diagnose that I had obsessive compulsive disorder. So thank God for that, but he never got me on the couch. Thank God for that, because who knows where it might have gone, Doc. So what the problem is, though, in the early stages, now Freud thought he got this from his clients, the people who were coming to see him, and he was talking to them. He had him on these women on the couch. It seemed to be mainly middle-class Viennese women talking about their early life experiences, and he's like, okay, taking down information. And really what he seemed to be getting evidence for was really child sexual abuse. It was not the fact that these women were sexual creatures at the age of 1. It was that they were having sexual experiences forced upon them by family members or other people like that. And Freud actually in the beginning did try to propose that as this is what was going on, but the society of the time was way too stuffy, did not want to hear about something like that happen. It just could not happen. It simply didn't exist. Sexual abuse didn't exist. It did not happen. So some scholars theorized that Freud had to kind of go back and kind of recreate it as the Oedipus complex in order to get a hearing, because he didn't want to throw away the data, so he just made up something else. And so, that's what some people say. Okay. Totem and taboo. 1913 it comes out. This is Freud's explanation of the origin of religion, and it's based on, two people that we've heard of. Number one, the first one was Charles Darwin. We talked about evolutionism, and Charles Darwin was the father of modern evolutionary theory, that things evolve from less complex organisms into more complex ones, and they change as they go. There are mutations, there are adaptations, there are all sorts of things that happen. And Darwin was not a one-hit wonder apparently, because he did a lot of different things. And one of the things he did, he observed gorillas and wrote about his observations of gorilla culture. Makes me think of Magilla Gorilla from the 70s. There was a cartoon, I think it was called Magilla Gorilla, who was in some kind of rock band. It was a cartoon from the 70s. What are you gonna say? Anyways, and then on totemism, our friend totemism. Remember when I talked about Emil Durkheim, and Durkheim thought one of the main features of religion was totemism, a sacred object that represents the group. And there was a man, William Robertson Smith, who did some work on totemism that impressed Freud, and that Freud relied on. Perhaps he should not have. You should never really rely on just one person's work, because if some of it turns out to be wrong, then it kind of undermines your own work if you've just based it on one person. So he had Darwin, he had William Roberts, he had Darwin for the evolutionary aspect of looking at gorillas. And then he had this other guy, William Robertson Smith, and his work on totemism. I think it was totemism as practiced in northern Africa, amongst tribes in northern Africa, I think. Don't quote me on that. And this was Freud's theory. Freud believed in totem and taboo, or proposed the idea, that the first humans, remember this is his imagination, because none of us was there, but just go with it. The first humans lived in what he called primal hordes. A horde, like a group. an unorganized group, or somewhat organized group. The first primal in the sense of first, not necessarily in the sense of primate. Maybe there's a double meaning going on here. There were people who lived in primal hordes, these first groups of hominins or hominids, whatever you want to call them. And these primal hordes were dominated by a single male. There's a single male gorilla or ape or monkey or whatever you want to call it, primate, who was also the only one who could have sex with the females in the group. Again, notice the presence here of the Oedipus complex. You know, little boy wants to have sex with the mother, can't get the mother because there's a primal male there, okay, the father. So see how he's applying it to human history. So they live in these hordes dominated by a single male who has sex with all the females. Well, the other primates don't like that. They have their urges and drives towards sex, and those need to be fulfilled. And so the male offspring, as they oppose this, they're either kicked out of the horde, told to go elsewhere, or they are subdued under the power of the dominant male, who of course is their father. Okay, they're all related. They all come from this primal father, and from the females who are their mother, to one extent or another. Eventually, these groups of non-dominant males come together and they kill the dominant male. They kill him to get him out of the way so that they can now have females. But they know that without the unifying force of the dominant male, they're all just going to fight each other for the females. Who gets the females now? They're all just now, it's going to be a bloodbath. So what they do is, for the purposes of peace, the members of the horde decide to repress their instinct, repress their drive, their sex drive that they have to possess all the females, have them all, regardless. They will repress that, push it down into their psyche, and rather they will share the females amongst themselves. So everybody gets a crack at the women. Different times. Different times. That Freud was writing. He doesn't seem to think about how the females might have thought about this. But anyways. So they all get to share them amongst themselves. And because they needed to absolve their guilt from killing the father of their group, they developed a ritual in which the killing of the dominant male was not only celebrated, but they could also atone for it. They could make up for it. They could make up for their guilt that they felt for killing the head of the primal horde so that they could get at the females. Now, Freud thought that he found support for this view in totemism, which he believed was the oldest form of religious practice. So he thought totemism was the oldest form of religious practice. In totemism, he thought one finds the prohibition against incest. So, for example, you're not supposed to have sex within your totem clan. You're not supposed to have sex within the clan, sex outside. So I guess that would be the agreement that the males have to share the women, I guess. But also a feast when the totem animal was killed and eaten. So the totem you don't touch, you don't kill normally, but there are periods of time when you can take the totem, you can take the totem and you can kill it and eat it. Why don't you kill the totem, as I told you before? Because the totem represents the group. It represents the group. So you can only kill and eat it and assume its power under very set circumstances. Because you know you're doing something you're not supposed to do. You're not supposed to normally kill the totem. But in abnormal situations, you can. So for Freud, the totem represents the father, the primate, the original, their father, the original head of the group. Okay, he's their totem, and they killed him. So to kind of both celebrate him and also to make up for his death, they use a symbol of the father, which they will kill and eat. It could be a pig, it could be a rabbit, it could be any sort of animal, something like that, an eagle, something like that. Now, what does this have to do with religion? It is this chain of traumatic incidents, this chain of incidents, the oppression by the father figure, the desire to get the females, the killing of the father figure, and then the creation of a ceremony to remember the father figure, but also to make up for having killed him. All of these traumatic incidents are what become incorporated into just like the biology of human beings, the rest of us who come from this original group of humans. And that provides the impetus for religion. And so for Freud, it made sense that in religions you find this idea of sacrifice, of offering up animals to God. Why? In order to atone before God. Why do you have to atone before God? Well, for your sins, for the bad things you do to him. The things that make him angry. Oh, well, why would God be angry at you? Because you killed him! You killed him and you took his wives! You see it's going back to that original event. Now, all of this is complete nonsense. I mean, Freud is working from his imagination. He has no evidence for this. He wasn't there. And in fact, nobody has found evidence for this. You're not going to find any anthropologists, even any psychologists or religious studies scholars who believe any of this that Freud has come up with in his mind. It is his own illusion. But it's fascinating to kind of read and to talk about, because it gives you a sense of here in Totem and Taboo, he's trying to apply the Oedipus complex, his own grand theory, to the other grand theory, which is religion. And so why is religion all about worship and a father god who protects you, but who you also don't really like very much, because you're terrified of him, anyways. And so you have to offer him sacrifice and kill things for him. The next book is The Future of an Illusion. And this is and we did have a reading from this, I think it was one or two of the chapters. I didn't bring my readings with me. I should have brought my readings with me. I think it was 2 chapters from Freud's book on the future of an illusion. And the thing about Freud is, now let me see if I can remember it, because it's not in the reading. In Totem and Taboo, when the primal horde members have to kind of make this compact, this agreement that they won't slaughter each other, they will share the women, they're kind of also creating culture and civilization. And the thing that culture and civilization do is they protect you from the forces of nature. You band together, and so you're not alone in dealing with the forces of nature, which are very, very scary. And can hurt you in many ways and cause a lot of destruction. But if you're together as a group, you can fight against the forces of nature. But in order to do that, to have that security of the group, you have to give up certain things. Yes, you have a sexual drive, but you can't have sex with all the females because some of the females belong to some of the males. So you have to give that up. You have to just stay with maybe one female, or maybe 2 or 3 females, but not much more than that. And so civilization starts imposing restrictions on the things you want to do. If someone harms you, you can go and harm them. You can go and kill them. Vengeance. But with civilization, you can't do that because there's chaos. So civilization brings in all sorts of rules and laws to kind of tell you now, you have to live this way. This is the civilized way to be. This is what's appropriate in public arena. This is what's not appropriate, and all these things. And they frustrate people. So people walk around frustrated all the time. Boom, I want to hit people. Boom, I want to hit people. I want to have sex all the time. I want to stuff my face with food all the time. But I can't because civilization won't let me. So they're frustrated. So they need outlets. Religion is one of those outlets. Religion is one of the. Religion promises you that there's an afterlife. That first of all, it promises you that there's a purpose. There's a purpose to all these crazy things that you have to do, and that you can't just live according to nature and live according to your natural inclinations, your natural drives. There's a purpose. It also promises you that there's an afterlife where you'll be rewarded for all the sacrifices that you're making now. So yes, in the afterlife there will be 77 virgins for you to be your wife, and you can fulfill your sexual drive to your heart's content for the rest of eternity, yes. Or it'll be like a great banquet with all sorts of food, and you can party all the time. Party all the time, party all the time. I just want to party all the. No, Eddie Murphy. No, it was it had one hit wonder. It's actually not a bad dance song. Party all the time. Okay. And you can do it forever. You'll never get fat, and you'll never get sick, and you'll never get drunk. It'll be wonderful. So that's what religion does for you. So the future of it, but it's an illusion. Remember, Freud's an atheist. None of this is true. Religion is just giving you all these happy answers to get you through the fact that your life is really miserable because you have to follow all these rules and you have to repress, like the primal horde members did. You have to repress those drives all the time. You can't let them out. So the future of an illusion. The future of an illusion is the book where Freud famously claimed that religion is born from man's need to make his helplessness tolerable. Okay, realizing that we are really helpless. The male baby is helpless in the face of his father. Okay, in regards to his mother, there's nothing he can do. And if the baby just accepts that helplessness and moves on, then he will become a properly psychologically healthy adult. If he does not, if he just fights against it, then he'll develop a neurosis and he will not become psychologically healthy, and he'll need psychodynamic therapy, Freud's kind of therapy. But also helpless in view of what nature is, that we really have no control. I mean, think of what's going on with climate change. People are scared to death of climate change. I've been scared to death of climate change since I was in grade school. I'm 49. I was in grade school. Yeah, it was before high school. Except back then, the article said that the Earth was actually cooling, and they were worried that there might be an ice age. But apparently that was a mistake. But then, of course, I got into high school in the 80s, and it wasn't climate change then. It was the greenhouse effect. The ozone layer was going away, and we were all going to be irradiated like a microwave oven because the ozone layer protects us from the radiation of the sun. Apparently, its hole's still there, but no one seems to care about it, I guess, because it's still there. I checked on the internet. So it went from that to then global warming, and now it's not global warming, it's now climate change. So you see so it's been a long-term thing that people are worried about. But it's also something one of the scariest things is the question, like the elephant in the room. We can do X, Y, and Z. We could have done it 50 years ago. We could have done it 30 years ago, whatever. And we can still do things now. Hopefully we will. But what if nothing we do has absolutely any effect because the Earth is going to do what it wants to do anyway? You know? It's like me trying to make it rain on this block. Just here. Just outside our window. I want to make it rain right now. Actually, forget about rain. It's cold enough. Let's have some snow. Let's have a little bit of Christmas early, you know? Snow! You know, how do you when we can't even make it rain in drought areas? We just don't have the control. How do we stop a hurricane? We had Hurricane Ian, we had Hurricane Juliet, and I don't know if we have any more hurricanes coming our way. How are you going to how do you deflect them? How do you take away their force? We don't know. The most we can do is fly planes in the middle of them and find out how strong they are and how bad the damage is going to be. Yes, I know, my little friend. So, why was I telling you that? Oh, yes. So we're scared. We're scared of nature mainly because we really, deep down for Freud, deep down we know we really have no control over what nature is doing to us. We are 7 billion primates who are living on the surface of a rather tiny planet around a star, and we really have no control of what's coming at us. You know, we don't know. We don't know. There could be, a quasar or a supernova that we don't see living in our area of the galaxy that if it explodes could annihilate us. And what will we do about it? What will be our solution? To get on spaceships? Not at the speed that we go. We wouldn't be outrunning a gamma ray burst. So anyways, so that's what he's talking about, helplessness. Okay, so I know my alarm went off, so let's take our 10-minute break and come back. I'll see you in 10 minutes. Wanted to mess with that. Quiet. Just one. Just one file. That's probably enough. Okay. The recording here. Alrighty. Where was I? Future of an illusion. Helplessness. I was talking about that. So for the future of an illusion, in his book, and then also you can get this in the reading, I hope. Religion derives from a person's resolution of the Oedipus complex. How the person resolves the Oedipus complex is I guess how religious they will be, or non-religious that they will be. With religion, you anthropomorphize your father into a god. This word anthropomorphize means to change into a human. Anthropo, you know anthropos? You know anthropos means human being in Greek. And I'm sure you know the word morph. Say someone would say, well, he morphed into a bird and then flew away. So you understand what I mean by that. He changed. So to change into a human form, anthropomorphize. And more thighs. Okay? Anthropos, man, human, woman, of course, and morphize, to change into. So what happens is and that relationship of the baby to the father, the male baby to the father, is anthropomorphized into a god. You take nature and you make it into human, like you give nature, the world, human-like characteristics, mainly fatherly characteristics. So you start to feel like nature cares about you, that there's a God who is like a father who cares about you and is stronger than you and can take care of you. And because you change nature into human like yourself, you can have a relationship with it, a personal God, as they say, rather than an impersonal God. You have now you have someone you can talk to, your father figure, your daddy in the sky. You can talk to him now. You can have a relationship. So just as in the Oedipus complex, a young boy will resolve the complex by accepting his father's authority and integrating that into his psyche, that acceptance. Adults resolve their feeling of helplessness, the same feeling of helplessness, they can't get what they want, that same feeling by projecting a father figure onto the universe. And so religious ritual acts as a way to protect humans. It's a protective device against the neurotic aspects of the Oedipus complex. It channels, remember his first article on obsessive acts, religious activities channel those Oedipal desires into more, productive or creative ways, more constructive ways. So it kind of relieves the stress of the neurosis that's there, of being helpless in the presence of your father, whom you both hate and both love. Psychology's job is to uncover and remove this illusion. And before I go on with that, I want to talk about this distinction he makes in the reading about illusion and delusion, because it is a major point. Illusion versus delusion. He does not say that religious people are delusional or even irrational. And sometimes you'll hear this said by people, anti-religious people, and I use that word deliberately. They're, I like to listen to comedians a lot, and sometimes it became the thing about maybe 10 years ago, especially. There were people before that, but especially to become really down on religion and make fun of, not just make fun of religion, but make fun of how stupid people were for believing in religion. And I'm not saying whether they're right or wrong, I'm just saying that seemed to be the trend. And people, I think, were really taking Freud's ideas and using them in comedy, even without giving Freud credit. But they did not understand his distinction between illusion and delusional, or illusion and delusion, because he did not think that religious beliefs were irrational. They might come true, they might be true. They were illusions, as he says in the reading, the future of an illusion. He doesn't say the future of a delusion. The illusion is religion. Religion is an illusion. It has facticity. It has the elements of being the truth. And yes, it could probably be true that maybe there is a God. That's not, people talk about a God and think about God. It's not completely irrational to think that there could possibly be a God. How would you know? Of course, but nevertheless. So that's an illusion, but it's more a delusion. When a delusion is when you're thinking about something that certainly is most impossibly going to happen. Like Jesus is going to return to the earth and reestablish the kingdom of the Jews, and there'll be an eternal reign of peace. For Freud, that's something that's almost certainly never going to happen. For him, Jesus is dead somewhere. Jesus was just a man and he's dead somewhere. He's not living off in heaven waiting to return. So that's more of a delusion. That's something that's not even rooted in reality for Freud. So that's what he means by an illusion and a delusion. Religion is not a delusion. Religion is rooted to some extent in reality, but it can become delusional when it starts losing even that hold on reality that it has. Okay, we need to keep that in mind when we talk about Freud's thought. It may be that I might find out someday that I am royalty. It's possible. I'm Irish, so it's not very likely. But you never know. The Irish were ruled by the British for a long, long time. Maybe one of my relatives married into some Margrave's family, or, a baron or somebody, or a baronet, And you never know, and someone might come knocking on my door one day, and say, Lord Whiskey Beard of Dunedin has died. You are his successor, You never know. It's probably more of a delusion than an illusion, but it's not outside the realm of some possibility. That's probably more of a delusion. The fact that I might win the Powerball, that's more of an illusion. It's not outside the realm of possibility. But when I was listening to the television earlier today, they said that the numbers were like 290 some million to 1. So basically me versus everyone else in the country, almost. That's not impossible. Someone will probably win it. Eventually, someone will win it, I would imagine. So it's not a delusion, it's an illusion. It's rooted in some reality that there has to be a winner because they're running the contest, the Powerball contest. Is it weekly, or it's weekly, right? Weekly or bi-weekly? I forget how long they're doing. I think it's every week. But me, becoming the next baronet of Dunedin is probably more of a delusion. It's probably really outside the realm of reality. Freud's theories are studied, but they are not widely held anymore. For example, the Oedipus complex. And anthropologists have not exactly been fans of the Oedipus complex, and it's not clear whether they've actually found that in their anthropological research. I'm not going to talk so much, or really that much, about Moses and monotheism. Again, it's him applying the Oedipus complex to the history of Judaism, where you have this man Moses, who is a leader of the Jews, who is then killed by the Jews, and then to make up for that, they come up with a whole sacrificial system, the temple, where they sacrifice animal upon animal upon animal in order to make up for their sins to God. God, who is really the God of Moses, whom they killed, to make atonement for it. So the same kind of ideas are recurring in Moses and monotheism. And again, the only book to really read is The Future of an Illusion, to get Freud's idea of religion. But Totem and Taboo and Moses and monotheism, just historically, anthropologically, archaeologically, they're not worth reading anymore. Unless you just are interested in Freud. And I would say I've never read them. I've read about them, and that's what I would recommend. Read about them, but don't waste your time reading them, because other than to say that you read them, there isn't much going on there in the realm of ideas. And of course, with all of these books, it does not help that the Oedipus complex is not even followed anymore. What can this mean for religion and violence? Okay, so the course is about religion and violence. So what can this all mean for that? Well, as per William James, we could see that religion does have a positive value. Okay, James recognized that there was the religion of healthy-mindedness. There was a point of view that someone could bring to religion, or that religion could give them, which gave them a positive, optimistic outlook on life. And therefore, religion had a positive role that might help support against a violent response. If people are becoming pessimistic and maybe tending towards wanting a violent response, maybe religion is not, maybe the answer is not to say, well, get rid of religion altogether, religion's the problem. No, maybe religion is the solution to kind of use that same religion to kind of bring them back, talk them off the ledge, say, look, Sarah, or Karen, or whatever, maybe we don't need to go blow up a whole bunch of people at the farmer's market. Maybe there are other ways that we can express our dissatisfaction. Protest, civil disobedience, if you want to be more confrontational. Pray for these people. Pray that there's a change. It always astounds me how many religious people don't turn to praying to their God, because apparently their God, a lot of them, the God's all powerful, right? Islam, Christianity, Judaism, the God's all powerful. So what does he need you to go down to the bus stop with a knife and start slashing at people in order to get his will done. If he wants to do it, he'll do it. Without you. He doesn't need you. Maybe you're mucking up the plan. Maybe you're screwing things up. And I said mucking up the plan. So just it's a word. Believe. This is being recorded, so I'm okay. But religion also has a pessimistic side that we have to look out for, which could be prone to violent responses if it's turned into anger or rage. No, I have a comment here. What did I write this for? Oh, I see what I was going to say. What I was saying there. Interesting. So you have to be aware of that there could be there could be a pessimism within religion, embedded in religion, inside the religion, that causes someone to a violent response. However, even the pessimistic side, if you look at it a certain way, it might not be so violent, because sometimes pessimism is just more of a, what's the point? Why do anything? Nothing ever changes anyway. This is the way things are. There's nothing you can do about it. So even a pessimistic view of religion might not necessarily lead to violence. It might lead to just inactivity. People don't care. Hopelessness. People think that, well, when you're hopeless, that's when people become, what's the word they use? You become radicalized. People are hopeless. They feel there's no hope. Their only hope is violence. No, their other hope is to sit in front of the TV and watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer all day. Watch The Never-Ending Story for like the 500th time. Not necessarily. Violence is not necessarily the answer. It could be inaction. Is violence ingrained in our nature? This is a question with Freud. Because the leader of the horde, of the primal horde, is violent towards the members. He wants to keep them away from his wives, call them wives. And the members of the horde eventually kill the leader. So remember, this is the first group of humans for Freud. And so already ingrained in our original experience of the human community is a murder. The murder of the leader of the primal horde. So violence. So maybe violence is just a part of our nature now. It's part of our biological, what's been passed on in our biology. But if that's the case, doesn't religion serve a good function? Because as even Freud admitted, religion helped to repress, religious practices helped to repress the violent tendencies which almost destroyed the primal society. Okay, remember what happens. They kill the father because they want to get the women. They get the women, so they decide, okay, now we need to repress our natural tendencies towards violence. And also we need to repress our guilt. So what do? We come up with a civilized society. We come up with religion, which will help us then transfer our repression, our guilt, into these practices. So religion is actually providing a benefit to human society rather than a lack of benefit. Because even with Freud, I wonder if he says it in the reading. Again, I didn't bring it with me, too bad. Freud says, well, maybe he doesn't say it in the reading, but he says it in another part of the book, The Future of an Illusion. He says, wouldn't it be great if you could just kill someone who wrongs you? If you could have sex with whomever you wanted to? If you could eat all the food that you wanted? And he's not joking around. Those are our natural drives, but we have to repress them in order to live together. Okay? Religion offers an outlet for those drives. So isn't that a good function? All right. No, I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about psychology. How has religion been studied by psychology, and also how has it been studied in the context of violence? And it has been. But in order to talk about that, I have to talk about a previous study, which is Stanley Milgram's obedience to authority study. Where do you think that was? Stanley Milgram was a psychologist, and he wanted to study how do people react to authority. Are they obedient, disobedient? It's a little bit of both, okay? And so we have this is the obedience to authority study of Stanley Milgram, which happened in 1963. Obedience to authority study, 1963. But I'm not going to talk about it. I've got a couple of videos of it that I got off of YouTube, and I'll play that. It's not very long. It's about 11 minutes, a little over, I think it's over 11 minutes long. And hopefully they'll do a better job explaining it than I will. But if they don't, then I'll step in and fill in some of the gaps. Okay. There we are.
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s.
Yes, we know. Everyone was going crazy. Okay, and try to get myself out of the way as much as possible. Turn off the light so you can see it. Okay, what do we got here?
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior and its relationship to social conventions and situations.
This setting, there are things to be done to me that I wouldn't allow in any other context. The dentist is about to put an electric drill into my mouth.
That's Stanley Milgram, not the
In
dentist.
this setting, I'm willing to expose my throat to a man with a razor blade.
Stanley Milgram, one of the most influential social psychologists of the time, was particularly fascinated with the dangers of group behavior and blind obedience to authority.
What is there in human nature that allows an individual to act without any restraints whatsoever, so that he can act inhumanely, harshly, severely, and in no way limited by feelings of compassion or conscience? These are questions me.
The experiments that Milgram and others conducted were controversial, and for ethical reasons may never be conducted again. Yet the results of those experiments remain groundbreaking, profoundly revealing about the tensions between the individual and society, and increasingly relevant to contemporary life. In 1962, Stanley Milgram shocked the world with his study on obedience. To test his theories, he invented an that would become a wound to human loyalty. In ascending order, a row of buttons marked the amount of voltage one person would inflict upon another. Milgram's original motive for the experiment was to understand the unthinkable, how the German people could permit the extermination of the Jews.
When I learned of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how was it possible, I asked myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different, a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions did a person obey authority, who commanded actions that went against conscience? These are exactly the questions that I wanted to investigate at Yale University.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the area.
Psychologists have developed a theory to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly if they want to try making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment on obedience is still taught in classrooms around the world.
When inspired Milgram, I would say there were factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he really wanted, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment he could think of.
And this is electric paste to provide contact to avoid electric burn. Do you have any questions now before we go? About 2 years ago, I was there. And while they detected nothing serious, but I was trying to dangerous. No, they may be painful, not dangerous. Anything else? No. All right, take
But the experiment was real.
The victims were cognizant of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized and tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of level designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, he moves on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you are instructed to give him electric shock, starting with 15 volts. And you increase the shock one step on each pair.
Incorrect. Hard head. Just how far can you go? As far as necessary. What do you mean as far as?
Milgram was very much aware that obedience is a necessary ingredient for society to function, but he focused on the darker side of obedience.
It's actually essential to you. You have no choice. Oh, I have no choice. My number one choice is that I would warn everything.
Now this man makes disobedience seem a very rational and simple deed. Now other subjects respond quite differently to the experimenter's authority.
Wrong. Here. 75.
Some psychologists were troubled by the ethics of it. Many, if not most, subjects found it a highly stressful, conflicted experience. People who stammer, stuttering, laughing hysterically, inappropriately. Clearly, when people want to attack their shock, it wasn't like they were blithely, sadistically. People went stop and go. They were in a state of conflict, which was created tremendous amount of stress. So let me repeat.
As his voice began to show increasing frustration, so did I. And I was really in a state of real conflict and agitation. One of the basic contributions was that you don't ask people what they will do given this hypothetical situation. You put them in a situation.
Please precinct team. I name vote. Stand there, I'm
Compared to many members, one of the things that's a prerequisite for carrying out acts that are evil is to shed responsibility from your shoulders and hand it over to the person in charge.
I'm responsible for the actions here. Continue. That's slow.
He didn't hold any gun to his head, just the fact that he conveyed a sense of authority. Roughly 60-65% of the people went all the way to the top of the shop board.
Now continue. The last switch on the board is the 440 switch where you continue. Whether the learner likes it or not.
Well, probably the points I think are effectively the Nazis were all short-sighted about themselves and Dachau after the death camp from the Luftwaffe and the Naval.
I was. But he kept consistent. I told him that he's got to keep going.
What kind of radiation do we get today? I think we're still today. Probably the same. Why?
And I think people are just inherently obedient. It just really shows like how far human beings will go to appease what they perceive to be a authority.
Milgram has identified one of the universal social behavior, readiness to be authority, cuts across time. It's a constant. The other outstanding thing about these experiments is how much it has and keeps on permeating contemporary cultural thought. It's still with us in a very, very important way.
Nice name. Wolf, bear, dog, cat. Wrong. Answer bear. 240 volts. Nice sweet. No, you go back to that station. Let's get it again. So it's going on correct. You mean I got to leave one on the wheel? The experiment requires as I said before, Lois and I are making yellow in that. Start with blue, top page. Continue.
In a unique period from the early 60s to the early 70s, a group of social scientists conducted a series of experiments examining the nature of human behavior.
Alrighty, so what do you think? Yeah. That's that dude again. What do you think? Interesting? What did test your memory while you were listening to it? Do you remember what percentage of the people gave the highest, apparently the deadliest shot? About 65, yes, 65% of the people. I forget what the sample size was. It was rather large. It wasn't a small sample size because you're watching this and they're only showing you a few people, like a handful of people. But it's a larger sample size because the guy on the internet wrote about it on his blog, which was a fascinating read. Gave you some background on it. So most of the people gave the deadliest shock, which, well, they never said exactly, they never do say exactly that it would kill him, right? That it would kill the guy. They leave that kind of murky. Just that you kind of assume that it gets to a certain point and it could. And they throw in the fact that the actor, the learner, is actually, the teacher is the subject. This is guy's called the teacher, but he's actually really what he's called in the study is the subject, because this is the person that's being studied, not the other person. And the other person who is receiving the shocks and giving the answers is called the learner, but is really a confederate, is really an actor, or a person who's playing like an actor, who's acting the position. So he doesn't really have a heart condition. He's saying he does. So, they don't say that they would be killing him, but the guy does say he has a medical condition that if he got a strong enough shock, you could put 2 and 2 together. I think that maybe he might die. I said 63. I thought maybe that's when the study was published, but I guess they said 62. And doesn't think it's changed. I'm going to assume that I'm wrong. It's 62. 1962. Oh, excuse me, they said 65%. Yeah, 65% administered the full severe shock value. Okay. But they did not say this on the film because they had the severe shock. After severe shock was the deadliest shock, actually. I think I'm glad I wrote this down so I remember. 21%. So it was 65%. The majority, the large majority administered up to the severest levels of shock, but only 21% still administered the severest, the one with the 3 exclamation points. So it was 65% was the upper level, the severe shocks, and 21% went all the way to the 3 exclamation points, which were the extremely severe, most severe. So it wasn't everybody, but it was a significant number. So a significant number of them were willing to go up to the severest levels. Something to remember if it comes up on the quiz. What did most people do? Yeah. Is that what? That's okay. Milligram. Milligram. Yeah, milligram. You're welcome. And yes, as the little kind of documentary thing said, that there were psychologists who had problems with what Milgram did, and also there were people who criticized the fact that I don't think any women were included in the first experiment. But Milgram redid the same experiment over and over again. So he didn't just do it once. And that's the essence of experimentation, is that it's not just that you do it once and that's it. Part of the empirical method of science is that others can take your same procedure and they themselves should be able to repeat it and see if they come up with the same or similar results. Or if you're the scientist yourself, you should continue and to do different things with your experiment to see if it's valid, if it was just a one-time thing, or if every time you keep repeating it with larger sample sizes, more people involved, you're still getting the same numbers. And that's what Milgram did. So it is a pretty well-established experiment. He didn't just do it one time. I'd have to see what his numbers were, if he's got the same kind of numbers. But I think the overall experience was that no matter whether you had men and women, mixed group, everyone pretty much, whether you had the learner brought into closer proximity to the teacher, the person who was doing the shocking, or sometimes Milgram would lessen the contact that the experimenter had with the teacher, the person standing there in the lab coat telling the person what to do. He might move that person around, or might bring someone in, another party who then challenges in front of the subject, would challenge what the experimenter is telling the subject to do, and then see, by mixing stuff up like that, see if he got the same kind of results. But if I remember correctly from what I read, pretty much people do what they're told to do, was the upshot of his series of experiments. Now, what does this have to do with religion? Well, it has this to do with religion. We have this. The religious belief as a factor in obedience to destructive commands, by David Bach and Neil Clark Warren, two psychologists who took Milgram's study and applied it to religion to see what would happen. And they modified the study. They didn't do it exactly the same way. It was basically the same setup, okay, that you have. Apparently, a person is told that they're studying learning techniques, educational techniques, and so they have the learner who is hooked up to this machine, and you're going to be the teacher, and you have to give shocks along the way if the person gives a wrong answer. And then there would be the experimenter, person in a lab jacket looking very official, who would give you commands and stuff like that. So it's the same kind of setup as the Milgram study. The difference was this. They wanted to see the effects of religious motivation. And actually I have the study right here. I have a copy of it, which I got off of, one of the databases from a library. I don't think it was from our library, although, no, I don't remember. Might have been from our library. Well, I did get it off a database from a library. So I printed it out and read it. See, it's not very long. And what they did was they gave people inventories. They gave a sample size of 33 people. So the sample size was actually quite small, but Fuller, look at where they did it. I guess they did it at Fuller Theological Seminary, or wherever they did it. I guess their sample size, their student population wasn't large enough, maybe. But so they did it to 33 people, so take that for what it's worth. And they gave them a couple of inventories. One was called the Inventory of Religious Belief, and the other was called the Religious Attitude Inventory. Okay? The Inventory of Religious Belief would measure to what extent someone was a believer and to what extent someone was a non-believer. So that kind of spectrum of belief. And then the Religious Attitude Inventory was used to basically see, was someone, on which extreme were you? Were you a fundamentalist, like extremely religious? Or were you extremely non-religious? Or were you in the middle, like a moderate? Okay, so they used that in order to pigeonhole people, to know where to when they got the data back. They wanted to see, their hypothesis was to see what different people would do. People who identified as moderates, would they be more inclined to resist? Or would those who were extremists be more inclined to be violent? What would be the result? In fact, I can read to you their hypothesis right here. I think I have the hypothesis. Hold on. On the right page? No, here's the hypothesis. This is their hypothesis. This is their theory that they're seeking to prove or disprove. Persons scoring at the extremes on religious scales will be more obedient to an authority commanding destructive behavior than individuals scoring in the mid-range. They assumed, Bach and Warren assumed, that religious moderates would be more likely to disobey commands from an authority figure. And that's kind of like what people assume. You assume that someone who's like an extremist, like a terrorist or somebody, that they would be more prone to be violent and go do violent things. But it's exactly the opposite they found in their study. When the data came back about who gave the severest shocks, according to the results, they found that in point of fact, the extremists, those who were fundamentalists, or on the other end of the spectrum, those who identified as committed non-believers, they were more likely to resist the experimenter's commands than the moderate ones. here in the article, it says, the mean of the maximum shocks for the extreme groups, meaning, no pun intended, this is how high they were willing to go, was 285 volts. Oh, I should also mention that in all of these experiments, the equipment was rigged. It didn't work, okay? No shocks were given. All it did was, it was like, a special effect. When you press the button down, it went bang, and there was nothing. And then the learner was told to scream or to yell or do something. They didn't, so no volts were actually given. But anyways, so the maximum shocks for the extreme groups was 285 volts, which is still not nothing. I mean, it's not like it was nothing. But for the moderate group, it was 409 volts. Now, if I remember correctly, if I remember their description of the equipment, I think it went up to as much as 450. I think it was as high as 450 volts. Let me just see if I can find where they describe the equipment. If I can find the equipment. Yes. The device was actually a panel of harmless switches graded from 15 volts to 450 volts. So 450 volts. And the moderates, the people who could take religion, could not take it, maybe practiced it, maybe didn't practice it that much, they went up to 409. These data make it evident that the hypothesis was disconfirmed. In fact, it suggests the reverse of the hypothesis, namely that moderates are more obedient than extremes. Now, of course, you have to take into account the fact that it was a very small sample size, only 33 people. It was a mixed sample size, so it was it roughly half and half, male and female? Let me see. Oh, they said 33 subjects. I thought it was 33. Excuse me. 30 subjects. Sorry, I said 33. 30 subjects, 17 were male, 13 were female. So it was more male than female, but at least in this one they included females. And they broke it down according to each inventory. Here they give you the statistical values for each inventory that people took. So those who took the inventory of religious belief, how did that look when you look at it from that angle? Those who took the fundamentalism extreme, who were on the fundamentalist extreme, how did that look? Those who were the kind of the not non-believer extreme, and they crunched the data. But it all pretty much came out the same, which is that the moderates were willing to give the highest number of the highest level of shocks. So why am I talking about this? Well, this is just an example of psychological research, and it specifically delves into the idea of violence. And I don't know if this study has ever been repeated, and of course the sample is somewhat small, so I'm not sure, you always have to take that into account when you're considering correlations. But it is interesting that the extremists were less likely to follow destructive commands and commit destruction and violence towards another human being when they were pressed. Okay. So that's that. So that's how religion is studied. Yay! So I'm done with that. I'll move on to violence. Well, let's see. It's 7:04. It's, hold on a second here. So let's see when my alarm comes. Well, it's 9 minutes, so I'm not going to fit much into 9 minutes. So next week I will start with what is violence. I understand that I guess I'm running behind. Yes. If you look at the schedule, just continue doing the readings as they are in the schedule. Ignore where I am and what I'm talking about. Just continue to do the readings that are on the schedule. Keep regular with the readings so that you have them done. Don't worry if I've been talking about how is religion studied, but you should have read about what is violence this week. That's okay. Do the readings for what is violence. Just follow the readings and don't worry where I am, okay? Because I will eventually get to it. But okay, that's fine. I'm going to say that's the end, and have a good night. Thank you for being here, and it's good to see you all. See you next week.